Welcome back to the Get Off the Treadmill podcast for practice owners and leaders, where we are obsessed with how to build a successful practice and get a life too. Hi, I'm Chuck Blakeman, and we're going to dive into another topic that helps us make more money in less time, get off the treadmill, and rehumanize dentistry by giving everybody their brain back. Today in our Get Off the Treadmill podcast, we're going to talk about the multiplying power of distributed leadership and the concept of leader-leader. Leader-leader is a fundamental practice in the emerging work world of the participation age. It's the thing that teaches people to truly lead from their seat. We want to rehumanize the workplace by giving everybody their brain back. How do we do that? We do it through distributive leadership that comes through distributed decision-making. Because the more input I have in a decision, the more ownership I will take in carrying out that decision. Therefore, decisions should be made locally whenever possible, and it's almost always possible. And the end result of this leader-leader thing is going to be 100% engagement. We shouldn't have anybody who doesn't bring it all every day. Leader-leader is also one of the 12 tools that we teach our clients. We have a lot of other tools and principles and methodologies. We call it our quiver full of arrows. There's a lot of things we can shoot here, but these are the 12 basic tools of the participation age. I want to start today with a story of a submarine that gives us one of the best examples of what it means to have a leader-leader organization. Captain David Marquet, with virtually no warning and no opportunity to prepare, he inherited this Santa Fe, which was the worst-rated submarine in the entire U.S. Navy. Yet in 1 year, he turned it into the best-rated sub in the entire U.S. Navy, and here's the kicker. He did it with the same 134 people who had made it the worst for a few years in a row. In just 1 year, with the same people, the same sub, and the same organization surrounding the sub, they went from worst to first. Stephen Covey visited this sub and called it, quote, the most empowering organization I've ever seen, unquote. That's interesting because Marquette, like me and many others who advocate for distributed decision-making and the leader-leader model, we don't believe we should attempt to empower people. They already have all the power they need. We just need to release them. Yet there they were, part of the most empowered organization Covey had ever seen. What changed? One thing: the leader. He introduced one simple principle. He moved the submarine from a manager-follower organization to a leader-leader organization. In reality, you wouldn't even have to switch leaders because the real difference here was not brought by a different leader. This is going to be important throughout this, but by a different belief system, and as a result, a different way of organizing the submarine. It's a way that any leader can adopt. This has nothing to do with charisma, motivational speech, things like steely-eyed bravery, or brilliant solutions. It was simply about one thing: distributed decision-making, which comes through distributed leadership. Marquette invited the other 134 people to participate in leading by both allowing and requiring them to share in the decision-making. To make that a reality, he and his officers formally listed responsibilities. There we have it. Formally listed responsibilities that used to belong to the upper ranks that were all pushed across the organization so decisions could be made locally. Please hear my language on that. They didn't push them down. They pushed them across. Too often we hang on to this hierarchy thing that does not help us. We'll talk a little bit more about strategic and tactical leadership, but we push decisions across the organization so decisions can be made locally. They eliminated as much of the top-down pyramid as they could, and they both allowed and required that decisions would now be made locally whenever possible. This is at the core of distributed decision-making. Marquette also lived out one of our fundamental principles. The art of leadership is to know how few decisions the leader needs to make. Let me say that again. This is an important cornerstone of being a leader. The art of leadership is to know how few decisions the leader needs to make. I know that runs counter to everything you've been taught. Managers make decisions. Leaders train others to make decisions, and then they get out of the way. And that's what David Marquet did on that submarine. Jack Dorsey has the same mindset, CEO of Twitter and Square. He says, when I'm making decisions, I'm not leading. He says, when I make decisions, it is a failure of leadership. Marquette called this distributed decision-making intentional leadership. Here's one of the significant differences between managers and leaders. And you'll find out throughout our podcasts that we think managers should be eliminated from business altogether. And leadership is the key to great business. Here's just one reason for that. Managers make a living making decisions. They become indispensable making decisions. Great leaders make an impact by asking questions, training other people to make decisions, and getting out of the way. They become dispensable. Great leadership is about replacing yourself. Great management is about making yourself indispensable. Marquette called it all intentional leadership. He taught people to only come to him with answers and plans for execution. He wanted you to come and say, I intend to do X. We figured this whole thing out. Here's what we plan to do. And instead of telling them what to do, he would then ask questions to see if their plan would work. And if, as their sounding board, he couldn't poke holes in it, then he simply said to them to execute their plan. So they came and said, I intend to do X. He said, well, what about this? What about this? Have you thought of that? How does this fit into other things? He used his strategic position in the submarine to help them fit their tactical decisions into what was going on throughout the submarine. And once they agreed they had something, they just went and did it. In 1 year, on that one simple principle of distributed decision-making, intentional leadership, he took the worst performing submarine in the entire U.S. Navy and turned it into the best performing boat with that one simple practice of distributed decision-making by formally and fully distributing the leadership. But how did he do it? This is one of our first big principles of distributed leadership in the participation age. Managers tell, leaders ask. Before Marquette took over the Santa Fe, the former captain had received really high marks for how engaged he was in every aspect of the ship's performance, and he was stellar at giving commands. That's what managers do. Marquette turned it all around and gathered the sailors and said, you tell me what you're going to do, and I will just ask questions. Why should I tell the galley chef how to run the kitchen? Why should I tell the torpedo lieutenant how to run that part of the boat? They know better than me how to run this. They're smart. They're motivated. I want them to be intentional about coming to me and saying, I intend to do X. I've already got this figured out. And Marquette took the role of a great leader. He asked questions. Managers do the opposite. Managers tell, and when they do, they create codependent, passive employees who wait around to be told again what to do the next time. That is exactly the problem the last captain had. He was great at telling people what to do, and they were great at sitting around until he would tell them what to do. And as a result, they took no ownership. You'll hear this 1,000 times from my podcasts. Input equals ownership. When you tell people what to do, they have no ownership. Marquette took the opposite tack. Leaders ask. Managers tell, leaders ask. And when they do, they create what we call stakeholders. Fully adult, self-motivated, self-managed staff who take ownership of not just their tasks, but the mission of the entire organization. You see people fitting their thing into what goes on throughout the whole practice. Nothing shows this dichotomy between managers telling and leaders asking more powerfully than this story of the Santa Fe. Another legacy of the Santa Fe is that you know you have distributed leadership when everybody is making decisions. Until then, there is still work left to do. Everyone on the boat got involved in making decisions. Everyone in your practice should get involved in making decisions. We've got to help the office manager learn how to stop telling and start asking. Turn them from office manager into office leader. Another important note on the power of distributed leadership is that it results in permanent change unrelated to who is leading. This gives you the impact of the leader-leader model. When it's in place, it has its own legacy and will impact the organization long after the leaders who put it in place are gone. When leadership is dependent on the genius hero, which is what we think of as the inspirational model, the Tony Robbins and the George Patton and all that stuff, things only work as long as that hero is in place. But when you are a functional leader and you change the very structure of the organization and push leadership and decision-making to every edge of the organization, it carries on without you. By the way, did you hear my language there? I didn't say let's push decisions down to the bottom of the organization. We need to stop thinking that way. Leadership is broad. It's across the spectrum of the organization. We need to have decisions made on the edges where they have to be carried out locally. For many years after Marquette left the boat, the formal organizational changes he made allowed the boat to continue to win awards and promote more officers and enlisted men to positions of increased responsibility than any other submarine in the entire U.S. Navy, including 10 subsequent submarine captains. Marquette wasn't there, and yet for years after he left, this intentional leadership, this leader-leader model continued to make an impact in the world around it. That is great leadership. It is not about charisma or having to give great speeches. It's about simply formally changing the way an organization is designed so that everyone can become a leader. So change is formal, it's not just verbal. Too often it's just verbal. We have charismatic leaders doing a lot of verbal stuff. Some leaders will make impassioned pleas to people to help them lead, get involved, make suggestions, followed by the old open door policy comment. And most of them truly want that input. But the missing ingredient is formal distribution of leadership responsibilities. Distributed decision-making does not happen without distributed leadership. Formal, functional, organizational change that distributes the leadership. We can't just say we want people to lead from their seats. That's just noise. And frankly, if they took our advice, it would require them to buck the very hierarchy that still holds on to the formal leadership. You're just setting everyone up for a showdown with their manager. Most people are smart enough not to take us seriously when we invite them to join us in leading verbally. They know that no matter how much we desire it and how often we say it, until we begin to dismantle the pyramid scheme of the factory system dentistry that still governs most practices, they're not going to bite. They know that it would actually get them in trouble to take you seriously. You've got to formally change the way things are organized so that they understand decisions will be made locally and they can come to you and say, I intend to do this. And the decision is made. They just haven't carried it out until they get your input. Another impact of the leader-leader model and flattening the organization this way is what we call the mission-centered practice, the mission-centered organization. We have another podcast on this. We go into this at length, so I'm just going to share it quickly here. But it is the second major lesson of distributed leadership. It isn't a motivational speech or taking someone for a walk or encouraging them to get more involved. We won't get people to participate and share, which are the two hallmarks of the participation age, unless we are willing to radically change and deeply flatten the formal pyramid reporting structure. This means formally pushing leadership across the entire organization that used to be held closely by a few at the top. Only then can we expect localized decision-making of the kind that Marquette saw happen. The point of this is that if we're all leaders, now we serve the mission. And we serve at the pleasure of the mission, and every one of us, no matter what our functional leadership is, whether it's strategic or tactical or something else, we all serve at the pleasure of the mission, and we serve that boss. Listen to that podcast for more on that. So the question is, how can everybody lead? We call this the leader-leader organization, but by definition, a leader has followers. So on its face, it seems absurd and naive that everyone could lead. I get it. I assure you it is neither. This is hardcore success strategy for businesses that want to thrive in the emerging work world. When you read the word leader, what is the first image or person that pops into your head? More often than not, it's the guy in the white horse out front with the trumpet or the flag, Tony Robbins, George Patton, that inspirational person. That's one mode of leadership, but that is only one of at least 4 ways everybody can lead. And it's actually the most uncommon. Inspirational, motivational leadership is the most uncommon of the 4. You can be something, you can do something, you can relate to others, and you can inspire. Those are 4 ways to lead. Be, do, relate, inspire. We have another podcast on those that get those all out there in a way that will help your staff understand how they can all lead. But the inspirational leadership mindset gets all the press because it's the most visible, it's the loudest, and it makes for the best movie or story plot. There are countless other ways for people to lead. As a general definition of inclusive and distributed leadership, we have to change our understanding of what leadership is. Here's our definition of leadership. Leadership is any act that improves the life, situation, or performance of another individual. Let me say that again. Any act that improves the life, situation, or performance of another individual. If you can perform an act that improves the life, situation, and performance of another individual, then you are a leader. Therefore, everyone is a leader because everyone can perform acts that improve the life, situation, or performance of somebody else. That is the leader-leader model. By this definition, anybody can lead and everyone should lead. But again, we have this truncated one-dimensional view of leadership that makes it hard to get this idea across without redescribing leadership. Leadership is also something that exists along a continuum. It's not something you get because you have a sign on your door or you have more bars on your shoulders. Leadership is something that is organic. If you look behind you and no one is following, you're out for a walk. Most managers would not have anyone following them except that they can fire people. You take away the power to fire, and it would be interesting. You would find out who's actually leading and who's actually following. The leadership continuum works like this. There are highly tactical leaders, people who are pushing the broom, making the chairs, answering the phones. They're leading because they can perform acts that improve the life, situation, or performance of another individual. On the other end of the spectrum are highly strategic people who are doing the same thing, performing acts that improve the life, situation, or performance of another individual. They're just doing it very differently. And then in the middle, there are people who are both strategic and tactical. And it's a fluid continuum. Some people spend more time one day being highly tactical and another day being strategic. This is very simple. 3 kinds of leadership: tactical, strategic, and a combination of both. This is the answer to how everyone can lead at once. We're all bringing some improvement in some way to the lives of others. The only questions remaining are, to what degree am I improving the lives of others? How much leadership responsibility am I taking, tactically, strategically, or both? And the second question, what form is that leadership taking? Am I more of a tactical leader? Am I more a strategic leader? Do I have a combined role like the office leader would have? The broader the impact and the more followers, the more we see a person as a strategic leader. The deeper the impact and the more local it is, the more we tend to see people as tactical leaders. This isn't a qualitative division, simply a practical one to answer the above 2 questions. To what degree am I improving the lives of others, and what form is it taking? Knowing this gives us more opportunity to develop people in their highest and best contribution. So this is a continuum. There are a lot of people who function both strategically and tactically, and I would say even in factory system dentistry, a lot of managers actually, and very thankfully, don't function like managers, even though they were taught to be managers. But they function more intuitively like leaders because they know it's the right thing to do. It will make the practice more successful. A good manager will reject management, and they will focus instead on improving the life, situation, or performance of other people. They will act as servants, not as people to be served. Just about any time someone has described to me a great manager they've had, it was because that manager was doing very little, if any, managing, and was functioning more as a servant leader, asking great questions, pushing others forward, training others, and getting the heck out of the way. So what makes a leader? And where does management fit in? These are great questions. If we say everyone can lead, how does that work? And where is the place for managers in a leader-to-leader organization, if they even have a place? We're going to tackle this in our next podcast next week. So what should we do next? What's one thing you can take out of this podcast today on the concept of distributed leadership and the leader-leader model? What's one thing you can take out of this? By when will you execute on that? And who will you get to support you in that decision and in the execution of that decision? If this podcast was helpful, please subscribe by computer or by phone, or connect with us at www.gottsummit.com, 2 T's, G-O-T-T summit.com. That stands for Get Off the Treadmill. We have those summits quarterly for dental practitioners only. Or connect with us at www.chuckblakeman.com, or email us at grow@cranksetgroup.com. Let's get off that treadmill. Let's get into the participation age. I look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Thanks.